Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Welcome to the Touch MBA podcast, where we're all about helping you, MBA applicant, figure out which school fits you best and how to get in your target schools. I'm your host, Darren, and this week we spoke with Sean Ferguson from HKUST Business School, and we had a really great conversation about not only what makes HKUST unique, but also about the unique challenges and opportunities of attending a top business school in Asia. Sean previously used to run MBA programs at Rice University before moving to HKUST, and it's clear that he feels there's a lot of opportunity for MBAs in Hong Kong, in Asia, and he really spells out why. And he also just shares some great tips on the admissions process. So you don't want to miss this one. And if you need help figuring out which business schools best fit your goals and your profile, go submit your profile or CV at touchmba.com. We'd be happy to give you some free, yes, that's right, free school selection advice. What we specialize in is helping people find the best fit business schools. So go head over to touchmba.com, check that out, and on to the episode. Here we go. I'm really excited to have our next school and guest on the show. We are going to be speaking with Mr. Sean Ferguson, who is the Associate Dean of Master's Programs at HKUST Business School, which many of you know is the top-ranked business school in Asia. Prior to joining HKUST recently in 2013, Sean was the Assistant Dean of Degree Programs at Rice University, where he was also an MBA director there. And Sean got his MBA from Rice, and he's worked for some big companies like Capgemini, Ernst & Young, and Procter & Gamble, and so forth. So I think Sean will really have a fantastic perspective to share, having come from a US MBA and run a top US MBA, and now being the Associate Dean of Master's Programs at HKUST. So Sean, I just want to thank you for your time and welcome to the Touch MBA podcast.
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate this opportunity to share a little bit about HKUST's MBA program.
Hong Kong similar to Houston, Texas?
Well, it's a tad bit more humid, a little less hot. The one thing is, in Houston, you're always driving in your car. Here, you're always walking outside in it.
Yeah. So, Sean, my first question is, what makes HKUST MBA unique? We know it's ranked very highly, but what makes it different and unique as a business school?
Well, I think for us was that the diversity and the environment of Asia really makes it unique here. When I speak about diversity, I'm not just talking about our student body, but I'm also talking about our faculty. Our faculty comes from all over the world, from the best programs. They were trained at the Harvards, the University of Michigan's, UC Berkeley, Stanford, and they're world-class researchers. Since the launch of the business school, research has been such a priority at HKUST, and it's really helped us raise our academic profile. It helps us impart a higher level of learning in the classroom to our students. We have students from 31 different countries represented in the program, and we're a small school of only about 110 full-time students per year. Now, when you have that kind of diversity and richness in the classroom, coupled with the perspective that our diverse faculty is bringing together, it makes for a rich classroom environment. Then you step outside of the classroom, and also creates for a very interesting MBA experience where if you come from a part of the world where you've never been exposed to a diverse environment, I think the amount of transformation that you'll experience as an individual being exposed to all these different cultures is going to be tremendous. And if you think about where all the opportunity is and the growth in the world is, it's in places that are probably not where you're from. And so if you're going to be a successful manager, being in this kind of environment is going to differentiate you very well from other MBA programs.
I can't wait to get deeper into that last point you made in terms of the growth in the Asia region and what that means for careers and so forth. But if we focused on those first 2 points, you talked about research and you talked about a very international cohort student body that you have. I think a common question applicants might have if they're applying to Hong Kong is what makes HKUST different than, say, CUHK and HKU, which are also strong programs?
Yeah, both programs are very strong. I think it's definitely the internationalism. If you look at the profile of our students, they come from different parts of the world. Then it's also the richness of their work experience in the industries that they come from. We also have a very international staff and team that I think can relate well to our students and what their needs are from a professional standpoint. We also strive to be very innovative in the things that we provide inside the classroom and outside of the classroom in terms of career services and student development and the kind of club environment here. Coming from a US MBA program, I think we're pretty in line with a lot of the top US MBA programs as far as that, thinking about the MBA as a total experience as opposed to just something you do in the classroom.
And speaking of that innovation, are there any new developments or initiatives going on at the business school that will impact MBA students?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're currently in the process of doing is a curriculum review. The focus is to think about how we can make more impact with our students. Part of this is continuing to broaden their global view of the world, but then figuring out, are there ways where we can have a greater impact with the learning outcomes of the different courses and things like that. This fall, we'll be teaching our core finance course in the MBA program in a blended learning model. So half the class will be in class, but then half the class will be online outside of the class where students can go at their own pace. We feel really excited about this because it will help us make the in-class experience even more impactful. I think what you have a lot of times in class is that, specifically for technical courses, you have to kind of cater to the masses, right? So maybe you're not able to go to the highest level or have the most impactful discussion. But here, what we feel like is we can, the kind of lower value add concepts that people can spend more time on that on their own, looking at videos of our faculty or doing exercises that kind of help level the playing field. And then when we come into classroom, and then you can kind of go for those higher level learning outcomes in a particular curriculum. The other thing that's important to us is leadership development, all right? So it's one thing to get all these technical skills, but we've spent a lot of time on leadership development in the program from the beginning to the end and experiential learning. And so what we're trying to do now is evaluate, are we still doing the right things? Are they relevant for this generation of leaders? And how can we, better add value? Because it's not just going to be the technical skills, but the soft skills that are going to help our students.
That's a whole nother interesting conversation about maybe full-time MBAs becoming full-time blended MBAs.
Yeah.
We could do that another podcast.
Yeah, I'll talk to you about it. I'll let you know how it goes.
So you'll be experimenting with one class.
Yeah, one class
this
this
coming
semester.
up.
Yeah.
Great. And you've been an MBA student at Rice and you've run the program there. What makes the student culture at an Asian business school, well, at HKUST in particular, different?
There's two factors. Hong Kong, first and foremost, is just such a vibrant environment. It's a networking city unlike anything I've ever seen. And what that does is give our students access to different relationships and people, whether it's senior executives or heads of states of different countries who can come and give a session by the student clubs or something like that. Our students have such access to things, and through that networking, they bring it to their peers in the program. The other thing is the international diversity, which I talked about earlier. I think it just makes everyone grow and transform. Our students are more open-minded, so they're really, I think, geared towards embracing these different cultures. And our students have become so passionate about representing their homeland. We have different student-organized trips that aren't necessarily for academic credit or anything to Japan or the Philippines or Indonesia or wherever. It just manifests itself, the internationalism, and then Hong Kong being at the center of this region just really kind of makes it such a dynamic, rich, and fun environment.
Yeah, and on that note, why get an MBA in Hong Kong?
So I think Hong Kong is probably the best city in Asia by far to get an MBA. It's situated perfectly where it's 1,200 miles from Beijing to the north to 1,600 miles in Singapore. And both markets, if you think about mainland China and Southeast Asia, want access to each other. and Hong Kong is roughly in the middle of it. I think its internationalism keeps it from being too mainland Chinese oriented, but the China influence helps make it very, very relevant for other markets in Asia that want access to it, right? For international students who are coming here, sometimes China can be a tough market to get into, but Hong Kong and Singapore create opportunities for people whose mode of business communication is English as opposed to Mandarin Chinese. And so you have access to both sides. And that's what makes, I think, Hong Kong great as a city.
That's so interesting because I know a lot of candidates come to Touch MBA and they say, I'm really interested in Hong Kong and Singapore because these are, two global financial capitals. But I'm concerned that if I go to Hong Kong, I don't speak Cantonese, I don't speak Mandarin. But in Singapore, everyone speaks English. So maybe my chances of landing a job are better over there. What do you have to say about the national language?
With my most tenacious students, whether they're in Singapore or Hong Kong, it doesn't really matter. In Singapore, I think there's a few more visa restrictions. The government is making cases that you have to hire nationals first, so that's a challenge. In Hong Kong, language may be an issue, but I think in both places, whether it's Hong Kong or Singapore, the most important thing is the skill set that you have. Asia is not like the US as far as MBA jobs and placement. They don't come on campus in volume in the same kind of way. So if you're looking for this traditional path towards an MBA job at a Fortune 500 company, this region may not be the best for you, whether it's Hong Kong or Singapore.
Yeah.
But as this region figures it out, it's still looking for the right skills that it needs, right? And it doesn't have within the local population everything it needs yet because it's probably 50 years in its development behind maybe the United States or Europe or that kind of thing. And so you can get around the language issue if you have a unique skill set. And so what we tell students is in the US, in my last job at Rice, you could switch geography, function, and industry. It was more challenging. You could switch all three, but it wasn't impossible. In Asia, I think you have to have more of a plan, right? Because you're already changing geography. So the only thing else you can do is change function or industry. You try to do both and you're changing all three. That's a problem in Asia because the hiring culture here is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And people want folks who have prior experience in an industry or a function as a kind of source of credibility in considering an individual for hiring. And so the language is an issue, but I don't think it's as big an issue as it appears to be. I mean, when I talk to my colleagues in Singapore and Hong Kong, the hiring timeline tends to be the same. It's just you have to do a little bit more of making your opportunities in this region. Now, with that said, the upside, I think, is much better here than the United States. So if you figure it out and you think in 5-10 years down the road, I think it's not even a question which is a better investment, say here in the United States, Singapore or Hong Kong are good opportunities. Singapore is English oriented, but the markets in ASEAN are all multilingual. And so it's not that clear cut of an English market. And there's still a significant English presence here in Hong Kong as well in the professional stratosphere.
So it sounds like underneath that, there's an assumption that you got to hustle to really market yourself.
This is one of the things I've been telling MBA students for the last 10 years. Even in the US, you have to hustle.
Yeah.
And this is in the US where the MBA is kind of the gold standard. Everyone understands what an MBA can do. Even there at the best schools, only about 40 or 50% of jobs come through on-campus recruiting. And so we would have troubles here because students would say, HKUST, this top 10 MBA program, and they associate that with everything being perfect. And in the MBA game, whether you're number 1 to number 25, you have to put in effort. We learned these concepts in business school about risk and reward. It's fine if it's risky, the reward will be more. And so as we evaluate candidates for our school, we want to make sure people have enough self-confidence and the right risk profile and tolerance that they see the opportunity in Asia as opposed to the risk,
That's great stuff. And one other question I had about the program is HKUST particularly strong in any academic discipline?
So I would say there are a few areas where we've had historical success. Hong Kong being a financial center, I would say historically 45 to 55% of our students wind up going to work in the financial services industry. There's been a little bit of ebb and flow with that since the recent financial crisis. What we're seeing is that there's more influence from the technology side in Shenzhen. Also, things like luxury retailing and stuff like that are important. And as a science and technology university, what we're trying to do is elevate our entrepreneurial profile. We have over 700 patents on campus, and we're trying to link the business school closer to those to see if we're able to commercialize those and get more of our engineering prowess as a university to market.
Interesting. And there's still a general management in China concentration, right, that people can take as well.
Absolutely. Right now we have a core course in China business and probably 7 to 10 electives on things related to China business. We just added a course yesterday about entrepreneurship in China.
I'd want to take that one.
Yeah, so it should be great. It's going to be taught by one of the senior executives here at one of the local prominent companies. Because Hong Kong is so kind of transient, we'll have always a good churn of new electives related to China. And what we're also trying to focus on is not just think about doing business in China, but doing business with China. And so as the Chinese companies emerge and are looking to expand globally, as a school, we see Hong Kong as the Chinese company's window out to the rest of the world. If a Tencent or Huawei are looking to go purchase something in Brazil or Chile or something, and we have students from these parts of the world who understand those cultures and environments, we think it can be a good mix.
Let's switch gears and talk about admissions. You mentioned some of the things you're looking for from students. And I know before we started this podcast, you mentioned fit. Fit is really important to you. So what are the fit qualities you are looking for from HKUST MBA applicants?
I think for us, what we're looking for is a thoughtfulness and why getting an MBA and why getting it in Asia.
Yeah.
Hong Kong's history is definitely linked to a legacy of being a British colony. It's a totally different place than it was at the time of the turnover in 97. So we want to see if people have an awareness about how things have changed and what are the uniquenesses of Hong Kong. Also, we're looking for people who understand that what it's about, what is the value of going to school in an international environment like HKUST. The other thing is emotional intelligence. And so this year, one of the things we added to the admissions process were student interviews. Because it's one thing for someone to interview with me, it's another thing to interview with the student. And what I found historically is that sometimes students are the best defenders of the culture of an MBA. They're really astute at kind of identifying what candidates may or may not fit with the program. And so will they be a good teammate? Do they respect the international diversity of the place? Do they say things in the interview process that give a sense of the work ethic and the approach and the mindset of the individual? We're always looking for the sharpest students academically. GMAT score, GPA, that definitely matters, right? But that's only one element of the process.
And so all the interviews will be done by MBA students?
MBA students do a large portion of it. In some cases, we'll have 2 interviews. If someone is, if they have an 800 GMAT and a 4.0 GPA, and they worked at Google for 5 years, they probably only need 1 interview.
Right.
Whereas someone who maybe they worked at a good company, but not a great company, their GMAT is 600 or whatever, and we just want to be more sure about that individual and how they fit into the school. So maybe that's when I get involved to do an interview. The 20% who we think have great potential, but it might not just show through clearly in the application.
Interesting. And so will those students, what will they know before they interview the applicants? Will they have seen a CV, or is it a blind thing?
No, they get to see the CV before the interview process. That's what we want to just keep it to. We also want to get a sense of, do they have a realistic view of what it's going to take to get a job in the region and that kind of thing. And so students are really good at probing at that.
Right. Well, I think you're dropping a big hint to our listeners, which is you better do your post-MBA job research, before you apply to HKUST. And so my next question to that is, how would you advise applicants to get a lay of the land, so to speak, so they don't sound completely fish out of water when talking about their career goals and expectations?
Well, aside from listening to a Touch MBA podcast,
thank you. Yes.
I think there's many different sources. And so the various ranking entities have school profiles that I think give a lot of insight into it, the school or the program. The other thing is, on the internet, there are various MBA boards where students talk about different schools and that kind of thing. It might be old-fashioned, but look at the brochure, read the website. We have a lot of our messaging that's right in there. And I'm always surprised at how superficial some of the applicant reasons for a school are. Right now, we're in the process of sending a lot of our staff to the various MBA fairs that go on during this time of year. It's really, really helpful for you to actually meet someone from the team and associate a face with a potential application. Personal contact is a great tiebreaker. And I think those are the places where you get the best information. And if you can, it'd be great if you could come to campus. We have a program where we take students to lunch. Other students take prospects to lunch. And I think that's a great way to get the real deal and see if you fit with the culture of a particular school.
Speaking of the website, one thing I saw on your admissions pages when you're talking about your admissions philosophy and requirements is you're looking for contribution.
Right.
I think that's tough for applicants to sort of grasp what exactly that means. Could you give a few examples of someone where you're like, all right, this candidate is really going to be a contributor to the program? What does that mean?
So one of my leading indicators for leadership is how did you contribute to things at the undergraduate level, at the workplace? Were you involved in some kind of charity initiative that was run through your company? In the United States, it's common for people to be involved with the United Way or something at their job. For me, I'm always looking for things that you did where there was no monetary incentive or no personal benefit. And so these tell me a lot about your character, right? Business school folks tend to be about making things happen. I will do this if I get that. But what I want to see are people who do this without getting anything. And I think that's a great way to kind of protect the culture of the program. And I think that's one of, referring back to one of your other questions, that's a great fit quality, right? If you've been a president or you've increased membership 30% in this organization, or in your workplace, you got your boss and his boss on board with this charitable cause, that gives us a great sense about your ability to make things happen.
Do you have any last tips for applicants on what they can do to best present themselves and improve their chances?
There's a fine line between distinguishing yourself and not sounding too formulaic. It's important to recognize that we read hundreds of thousands of essays and things like that. When someone says, oh, you're the number one school in Asia, that's not exactly what we're looking for. We want to know from you, what were the things that contributed to us being that school, right? Or a school of interest to you. So we almost don't even want to hear about rankings when you talk to us. The other thing that you can do is get to know people in the organization and be polite to everyone. It's so funny when people come here, or even in my time at Rice, they're nice as everything to the assistant dean, and then they treat one of our administrative staff very poorly. That's a great indicator of character, right? We want you to be the same person whether you're talking to a CEO or the janitor of a corporation. So I think those are the things that really stand out to me. Just being truthful with who you are, making sure you think about the real reason why you want to go to school. If a school's ranked number 10 and someone's ranked 14th or 15th, if you're interested in energy and number 15 is known for energy and number 10 is not known for anything related to energy, you should go to number 15, right? These rankings are really ordinal, and one of the things they don't do is show you the raw scores, because then if you saw that and you looked at statistical distribution, everyone's pretty close together, right? Just keep everything in perspective.
If we could talk about financing now, in terms of scholarships, could you let us know what percentage of your class gets scholarships and what your average scholarship amounts are?
So 41% of our class was awarded a scholarship. It ranged from 10% to 40% of the tuition fee.
Yeah.
So we're not quite as aggressive as U.S. business schools are with scholarship. And so we've been very modest in our price increases recently. So we don't have to offer as much scholarship if your price is low. Being a 3-semester option as opposed to a 4-semester option also saves you on a few opportunity costs.
I live in Vietnam, and funding is a big issue for Vietnamese MBA candidates. So Do you have any tips for those that may not have as much savings on how they can best improve their scholarship chances?
Distinguishing yourself as a candidate is very, very important. When I got here, we had quote unquote need-based grants. Need-based grants are great, but pretty much everything's on merit. As a university and as a business school, we recognize that in order to kind of have the international composition that we're looking for, certain markets, right, require more scholarships. And from time to time, we've adjusted based on market conditions in different markets. For example, this past year, we had a couple of more scholarships for Indian students because of the situation with the Indian rupee and us becoming relatively more pricey because of that. I think it's really about selling yourself and what you bring to the table. So if you're, say, a Vietnamese, I don't know that we have in this incoming class a Vietnamese student, right? So selling why this class needs a Vietnamese student and what you can bring to the table. I think for me, scholarship is all about how scarce you are as a profile for the program.
Yeah.
Sometimes students come to me and say, hey, I have a 750 GMAT. And I'm like, well, you just come from a part of the world where a 750 GMAT is really prevalent. So it's really about the scarcity of the profile that you bring, where you project out to, are you placeable, that kind of thing. And so don't just think about it on the admissions side, think about how you'll help the school and the university on the other side. The universities as academic institutions, first and foremost, that's one thing, but then beyond the academic experience, everything is kind of like being in a club. We want to make sure we have the right kind of people who are going to represent the university in the right way for the long term.
I have to ask one specific scholarship question, which is, let's say someone is a rare candidate, but maybe their GMAT is like a 640 or something. Should they retake it and try to score above 700 to improve their chances of winning a merit scholarship?
I always tell people, as it relates to the GMAT, it never hurts to do better. It's one of those things that can be highly correlated to scholarship at any school. And so what we used to always say is that if you think you need to retake it, you probably need to retake it.
That's good. I like that one. Well, I wouldn't like it as a GMAT taker, but yeah, it makes sense.
Sometimes it's not even just about us, right? So I would tell that person, if you have a 640 and you're thinking you're going to work at McKinsey or a place like that, that's tough.
Yeah, that's tough.
A lot of this stuff is not just impacting the admissions process, right? It's impacting the placement process. It impacts scholarship. You have a 640, maybe you get in, but now you get less scholarship. The better you do on it, maybe the more scholarship you get.
Great. And any last financing tips for our listeners to consider?
It can be a little bit more challenging in Asia to get financial aid than, say, the United States. And so that's something we're continuing to try to figure out. A lot of countries have low-interest loan/scholarships that they provide, whether it's FUNED in Mexico or Cofotora in Colombia. I think India has a few places like this. I think make sure you explore these opportunities as well.
The final and my favorite part of the podcast, which is about careers. So we touched a bit on this at the beginning of our talk about that need to hustle. We also talked about the importance of researching post-MBA paths. I think in the news, we hear all the time that Asia is the future of business. If you want to be anything in business, you have to move to China, you have to move to India, you have to move to Asia. I've lived in Asia for over 10 years, but I would like to get your opinion on this. Is it true? Should we question this? Is all the opportunity in Asia?
So I would say there's a lot of opportunity in Asia. You look at Europe, it's been like flat to 1% growth. Then if you look at the United States for the last couple of years, just getting to 2 or 3% growth. And then much of Asia has been at 6% growth. Mainland China has been anywhere from 7 to 9%. Yeah, it's here, right? Asia is definitely a good place to get started. And I think it's still at that phase where while a lot of companies are trying to go local with their talent, they're still in that transition phase where they need skills more than anything, right? So there's this place now for you to get exceptions. And what we see in Hong Kong is language and things like that matter for the first job. But once you get your foot into the market and have that Asia credibility, language doesn't matter as much for the second and third job. I think that's what makes this place special. So if you got some resiliency and you get in here, once you're in, you're kind of in. That's something to think about for people here. You getting into Asia, I think it gives you a great pathway back to whatever your country is. I think now in Brazil, China's the number one trading partner. In Chile and Peru, I think it's the same thing. Everyone is dealing with China and Asia and trying to figure out how to get in these markets because there's not growth in the Western world like it used to be. So if you get in early, I think we're still in that time where that window is wide open for you.
What's interesting about that is getting in early also means that you're entering a new forest. You're going to have to cut down some trees. The path isn't well trodden. You're going to really have to find those opportunities. Related to what you were saying about the growing trade relationships between South America and China and Hong Kong, are those guys or girls learning Mandarin? Is it really important for them if they're working even with the smaller or bigger Chinese companies to really speak Mandarin?
It definitely can't hurt, but I don't think it necessarily precludes you from all opportunities. You can never go to the U.S. and not speak English, the language that drives all the economic growth in that region, right? You never expect to get a six-figure MBA job. In Hong Kong, so to help put this in perspective for students, I say, look, the language that's driving a lot of growth here is not English. With that said, it's not impossible to find a job speaking English, right? There's still opportunities there. You have a skill that's kind of unique and not in a high prevalence here. And I'll give you an example. My wife, she worked at Shell Oil Company in Houston for 17 years in environmental health and safety. When we looked on the internet boards and things like that, they said must speak Chinese and English, right? And so we thought it would take forever for her to find an opportunity here. And the minute she turned over her LinkedIn profile to Hong Kong, search firms and things like that were reaching out to her. It can be more challenging, but depending on your profile, it might not even be relevant at all.
How does HKUST help students with this career search?
We have a plethora of career consultants and coaches. I think we have over 15 to really help students find the right mentor to kind of help them craft their story and their strategy for approaching this region. And these guys have worked in the region. Some of them are ethnic Chinese. Some of them are Anglos from the U.S. They're from all over the world. We have a former head of HR for JP Morgan Chase, the former CFO and CFO of Zurich Insurance Asia, people who worked at Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, like all these different companies, right? So we have people who can provide a lot of counseling and advice. And then what we're doing is working to develop our corporate relationships. And so we're really focused on helping elevate the MBA brand here in the region. If you look at a couple of reports from GMAC and such, what's really happening is that the last few years in this region, people were focused on specialized masters and specific tasks, things that manage costs. So a master's in accounting or a master's in operations or things like that. But as the economy has improved over the last year or so, people are focusing on the top line, and now they're looking at MBAs, right? And so more and more companies are more receptive to hiring MBAs in this region than they were a year or 2 years ago. We have this corporate development plan where we're focused on 100 companies, thinking about them as our premier partners, and really furthering our relationships with them to get students to the right place.
HKUST has that reputation as being a finance school, and you're in Hong Kong, center of finance in Asia. How many of those companies are non-finance companies?
We have 84 companies on our list so far, and only 23 of them are finance. We've got technology companies represented, consulting firms represented, consumer goods companies represented. I think the challenge with those companies in relation to the finance companies is that the nature of Hong Kong being a financial hub is that there's a more consistent 2 or 3 people hired from a finance firm here. Then like the consumer goods company might hire 1 this year, 1 next year, then go 3 years without hiring or something like that. So that's a little bit tricky. Think about a Harvard, they have 900 students. They provide so much scale and volume that from year to year, they can meet the needs of kind of pretty much any hiring organization, right? Whereas here, when you're 100, some years there's just not going to be a fit with whether the company is not interested in our students or the student's not interested in the company. We're trying to develop more of a model where you don't come to campus, but we develop like an intense relationship where, okay, so say what, this year, Procter & Gamble Asia, you're not going to be recruiting at HKUST, but if we have a candidate that's right for you, because we've got a relationship, I can say, hey, you know what, we've got this superstar candidate, Jenny Lowe, for you. You should look at her resume and bring her into your process and kind of push out that way.
Well, first, I think everyone's going to Google Jenny Lowe. see was that a made-up name?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll find a Jenny Lowe on.
What advice would you give to someone who's not from Hong Kong, not from China? They want to, like you said, be a part of this growing market and be part of these growing opportunities. Let's say in this case that they don't have a finance background, because I think it's a more direct correlation, finance in Hong Kong. So what would you advise those candidates to do and prepare to, make themselves marketable, or the most marketable they can be?
The whole job search process is fundamentally changing, and the digital world is kind of taking it over. There's still no substitute for person-to-person interaction. And, one of the things that we've seen over the last year, we actually did a study on how our internship placement was. We looked at behaviors, right? So you just have to be active in this market. And so the people who had found their internships first had 20% more informal coffee chats than the students who didn't. The people who had the jobs first had 50% more LinkedIn emails than those who didn't. The people who did have jobs and who didn't have jobs, they all had the same number of average number of LinkedIn contacts. So it was really about who was active with it, right? Particularly with Asia, there's a lot of 1 year or 16-month MBA programs like ourselves. The key is to hit the ground running. In the US, because it's a 2-year program, you can kind of, I want to consider all my options and things like that. Here in Asia, if you don't have your 80% direction before you get here, you're going to be toast in this process, I
appreciate that straight advice.
I think, for me, we try to be honest with the students. There is a ton of upside here. And I think our students who have cracked the nut and figured it out, they couldn't be happier. We've got students who they may work at a Fortune 500 company, but because of the dynamism of the Hong Kong environment here, they've got 2 or 3 businesses that they're running on the side. So if you've got an appetite for entrepreneurship, Hong Kong is great for facilitating that. If you're a person who's at their best at capacity, Hong Kong is an amazing place for that type of person.
Great. And how can our listeners reach out to those students and alumni to get a firsthand experience of the program?
I think reaching out to our admissions department is the best way to do it.
Great. Yeah. So I'll be sure to link to that in the write-up to this podcast. Finally, is there anything else about the HKUST MBA that you just wish more candidates knew about?
We really, really offer a lot of value for someone who's looking to choose a career in Asia. And what's amazing about our university is that we're only 23 years old. We've accomplished a lot, but we still have a great sense of hunger and ambition. Some schools you go to and the tradition's already set, your ability to impact is pretty low. But other schools like us, you have a chance of helping make the program, grow the program, shape it, and leave a legacy. And I think it's kind of poetic because that's kind of what Asia and this opportunity is all about, leaving a legacy, making a mark, and that kind of thing. So if you're looking for that kind of program, then we're your program.
Great, Sean. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your #1 school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.